Hello and welcome to the Successful Farming Podcast. Thanks for listening to our very first show. I'm Jason Meeker and I'm one of the hosts of the podcast. Since this is our first show, you're probably wondering what it's going to be about. Well, that's really up to you. I've got some ideas for the first few shows, but I really want to know what kinds of things you want to hear. Since this is the podcast extension of Successful Farming Magazine, we will be discussing the same kinds of topics you'll see in the magazine, but we also really want the listeners to be involved. Let us know what you think of the show, any suggestions for topics or for future shows, or just to say hello by emailing us at podcast@agriculture.com. You can find information about this show, our social media contacts, and future episodes of the Successful Farming Podcast at www.agriculture.com/radio. I'm really excited about our first guest for this very first episode. Ray Bohacz, the Successful Farming Engine Man, is going to come on. He's going to talk about his background in agriculture and his background in the automotive industry and working with engines and all that sort of thing. So make sure you keep listening to hear Ray. Today's program is brought to you by Acuron Herbicide from Syngenta. To learn more, visit acuron-herbicide.com. While you're there, hear firsthand accounts of how Acuron stopped tough, resistant weeds in their tracks and made sure they never came back in the Acuron Chronicles podcast series. Welcome back to the Successful Farming Podcast. I'm here with SF Engine Man Ray Bohacz. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and great to work with you on this.
Yeah, great. We're glad to have you in Des Moines. You're originally out of New Jersey, where you farm there.
Yeah, that's really something that kind of throws people for a loop, because New Jersey, even though our license plates say the Garden State, and to tell you the truth, the county where I live in, Warren County, not that long ago in the 1980s, had actually more dairy cows than people, but wow. Sadly that's changed. But thank God there's still an agricultural presence, and we have a family farm that's been in that we've owned, the Bohacz family's owned since 1954, which is before I was born.
Okay. All right. The first thing I wanted to talk to you about, or have you tell us about, me and the listeners, is how you got into writing for magazines. I know you started off in automobile magazines, but it was an interesting story you were telling us just a few minutes ago. Tell us how you got into magazines.
You know, like most farm kids, it's really hard to separate cars from tractors and equipment. And I was always a young man that loved mechanical apparatus no matter what it was. And I have to say I got that love from my dad. He was a fighter pilot in the Army Air Corps towards the tail end of World War II. There was no Air Force at that particular time, as the listeners know that the Air Force was formed after World War II, and he flew P-51 Mustangs. And what happened was that he had crashed in a sandstorm, and when he crashed, he ended up breaking his nose, and they didn't have pressurized cabins back then, so when he would go back up, he would have nosebleeds. Mm-hmm. So since he was mechanically inclined, they made him an aircraft and line mechanic on a bomber crew during World War II. He did not do that afterwards, but my love for mechanical things came from him. And then, you know, growing up on the farm and, having equipment needed to be fixed and also having cars. So I basically always had my foot in agriculture, my left foot in agriculture and my right foot, under the hood of a car. So like I said, there's real synergy between them. And then what had happened was that I have what's called monovision. So I'm nearsighted in one eye and farsighted in the other. Plus I have 2400 vision in my one eye. So I'm like a cyclops, I tell people. I look with one eye at all times. And the reason why I'm just sharing that with you is that that stopped me from I dreamt about being a fighter pilot, but they would not let me even near a plane, let alone they would let me near anything. They told me I'm blind in one eye. So, but what had happened was that I always grew up loving mechanical things, and because of my monovision, I am a klutz. I have no depth perception. I forget about it. I'm not a sports kid. I wasn't a sports kid. I wasn't because of a physical ailment with my eyesight. And due to my love for engines and love for machinery, what had happened was that since I was not involved in any sports, I was the kid in second grade who had Hot Rod magazine in his desk. Mm-hmm. So I always read about engines and read about machinery. And then what had happened was that I was going to school studying engineering, and I wanted to work. My dream was to work for the big three in Detroit. But then we also had the family farm. So I knew that and I was the only son, so I had an obligation to stay and help with the family farm. It was not a large farm, but it was enough that my dad could not handle it by himself. So that kind of kept me in New Jersey.
Okay.
But also what had happened at the same time, I ended up getting a job, what we'd call an in-town job, even though it was 30 miles away in a different town. I got a job for an oscilloscope manufacturer. And I also, when I was going to college, I worked as a line mechanic in a Buick dealership. So this kind of all came together. My love for farming, my love for engines, my love for technology, my love for machinery. And I had a shop, that was building race engines, and there was a magazine article in a car magazine, a Corvette magazine, and they had something written about pistons, and it was wrong. So I respectfully wrote a letter to them. There was no internet back then. I faxed it to them, and I corrected them, and then ultimately they ended up contacting me to write for them, and that is how I got involved with the car magazine writing, doing technical writing. But since I was always drawn to agriculture, and honestly, the engine does not know what it's in. It doesn't know if it's in a Corvette, or it doesn't know whether it's in a truck, whether it's in a combine. Today you could say it's a little bit different because there's such a proliferation of diesel engines in farm equipment. But back then there was small gas engine combines. But anyway, I love combustion, I love engines, and I love agriculture. And I also felt that there was something lacking within the agricultural community. That there was a wonderful job, let's say through Successful Farming magazine, to talk about agronomics, to talk about marketing your crop, talk about all those different things, and they were covering engine technology and machinery, but I wanted to try to get involved in that, and that's how I ended up here. And it's been a blessing to my life. It's great because, to tell you the truth, is my true passion is agriculture, and be able to help the agricultural community to understand a little bit more about machinery and their engines really is a blessing to me.
Yeah, and it really is a natural fit, because farmers are very they want to, if they can do it themselves, they're the original do-it-yourselfers, I think.
Oh, the original you're 100% right, because you were out in the country. There wasn't any place you could go. It was even today, you're the original survivalist. You had to, if the tractor broke down in the field, you had to get it going. If the combine broke, that was your livelihood. And that's one of the things that really drew me back to, I don't want to say back to agriculture, because I never really left it, but I saw that because, as you get older, you look at life differently. Mm-hmm. And the thing basically is that, if my writing helped someone's car go faster, I'm a drag racer, okay? So go faster in a quarter mile, really at the end of the game, what really good did that do? But if I could be a very, very small gear in this big cog that helps to feed the world, that makes a family business successful, and also, to tell you the truth, I would love to inspire a young person on a farm to pursue a career in engineering. And that doesn't mean that you cannot come back to the farm. It doesn't mean that you have to leave that lifestyle. Back in the 70s and 80s, the mindset was, if you left, you didn't come back. And that always bothered me. But I felt that if I could put this all together and be able to do this, and also, the pragmatic of it is, if you look at a farm, it's a business. Mm-hmm. It's no different than anything else. You have a balance sheet. And my contention was that, hey, I'm all for a yield bump. We raise sweet corn. We don't quantify our yield by, because we have fresh market sweet corn, by bushels. But the thing is, I'm all for a yield bump. I'm all for all of that. But if you have the greatest yield bump in the world, and then you lose that yield bump because of an unnecessary machine repair or something that you didn't do to service your machine properly, then that's all gone. Mm-hmm. So I think in agriculture, we need to look at the whole balance sheet. that we have to be concerned with agronomics, you have to be concerned with soil health, you have to be concerned with crops and the yield bump, but also we cannot let that yield bump be evaporated in the farm shop. And that's my goal through successful farming, is to help the farmer. I mean, I can't help you agronomically. I can't help you with that, all right? I just know how to put the seed in the ground. But we have people in the magazine that could do that. And that's really what I'd like to do. I'd like for you to keep that yield bump and not have it go out the window.
That's great. Yeah, that's a very admirable goal to share with
well, thank
with
you.
Farmers. Yeah,
thank you.
So along those lines, so if there's somebody listening that wants maybe doesn't feel like they're too mechanically inclined, although it'd be hard to find a farmer who doesn't at least know a few things about how engines work and how machinery works. But if they were just uncertain how to start, what kind of tools, what kind of tasks, service maintenance kinds of things should somebody look at as the first level of do-it-yourself kind of thing?
Well, I think the first level of do-it-yourself, most likely, most farm shops that I've toured have more than enough basic hand tools, equipment, welders, what have you. There may be some specific task tools that would be engine related. Mm-hmm. Let's say like a bore scope. That's a great thing. I mean, to have, they're inexpensive today. You could fit it, you could put it down a spark plug hole, inject a hole, look inside an engine, see if there's a problem or what have you. So there are some engine specific tools, but I'm going to probably throw something at you here, Jason, that's different than you would think.
That's all right.
It's more than a tool. It's a thought process.
Okay.
You have to think like the machine.
Okay.
You have to have the right thought process, and and especially now. Everybody says the crop prices aren't what they should be, and I agree 1,000%. And they're not what they used to be, and I agree 1,000%. But that doesn't mean that we should cut back on maintenance. I think it's a long view, not a short view. So the short view is, hey, I'm going to push that oil change, and yeah, there's wiggle room. You could do that. I'm not going to deny that, but I look at maintenance and I look at the farm shop like I look at soil health on our farm. If I mine all the nutrients out of the soil this year because I don't want to give the crop what it needs, feed the soil, not the crop deal, right? And if I do that in the farm shop and I say, geez, I'm going to use cheaper hydraulic fluid, or I'm going to extend the oil, or whatever you may choose to do. If you're retiring next year, I say, go for it, buddy. That's fine. You know what I'm saying? You go for it. But if you plan on being in this business, in this industry, then I think it's a mindset as far as maintenance is concerned. And I can't tell you enough how a good maintenance program probably gives you the best return on investment on the farm ever.
Yeah.
All right, you're spending money now, granted, but but the return, and that also going back to the balance sheet mindset. The thing is that if you look at, for instance, I'm going to divest for a second and talk about a car I have.
Okay.
I have a little Ford Escort, and because of my writing career for Successful Farming and for car magazines, I travel quite a bit, and this little Escort has just shy of 500,000 miles on it.
Wow.
It's got 462 or whatever. It's not 500,000. It's shy of 500,000. And people say to me, oh, the car lasted because you were a mechanic. No, the car lasted for two reasons. Number one, it was a good car. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, all I did was maintain it. I used high-quality synthetic oil. I changed the oil. I didn't abuse it. I didn't wait for stuff to break. Right. So I said, okay, at 250,000 miles, I put a fuel pump in it. The fuel pump was still good.
Yeah.
All right. But in my business, as far as my writing life is concerned, if I make an appointment, let's say, to come out to Successful Farming, I have to be there. Mm-hmm. So I use that mindset of maintenance, and oftentimes, I go to a farm or visit a farm or go to a friend's farm or something, and something simplistic like not putting the plastic plugs, the rubber plugs back into the open hydraulic lines, and I see that that's going to cost you. That's like not brushing your teeth.
Right.
And
it may save you 2 seconds now.
2 seconds now, or things I see a person buy. They go and they buy a cheap aftermarket air filter. And you could say, okay, fine. Well, maybe the filtration is okay. Maybe it isn't. I can't tell you there's so many. But the thing, what a lot of people don't understand is that there's, and specifically on turbocharged equipment, which most farm equipment is that there's a pressure drop across that air filter. And then when the engine is exposed to an air filter that doesn't have the proper flow characteristics, so you have to, for instance, a filter needs to filter, that's what its name is, and it needs to be able to flow. So if it has proper filtration, or does or doesn't, is moot, but doesn't have the proper flow characteristics, you're exposing that turbocharger seal on the compressor side to this high pressure differential, and then over time, not overnight, not in 100 hours, you end up puking a turbo seal. Now you're putting oil through everything. So granted, you save $10 once a year or twice a year on the filter, and then so many hours later, whether it's 100 hours, 500 hours, whatever the number may be, you're buying a turbocharger.
Right.
And Murphy's Law being what it is, it's going to happen when you need that tractor.
Right.
And now you have X amount of dollars invested in a crop. The crop either needs to get planted or needs to get out of the field. I mean, I know that empirically that you usually have some wiggle room getting out of the field unless you're up against it, unless it's going to snow. But planting, you have that optimum window. And I look at my equipment on my farm to be like emergency equipment, like an ambulance, like a fire truck. It's got to roll when it's got to roll.
Right.
And so something like that. So I can't stress enough how, and if you follow this basically, sounds like a canned presentation. If you follow the manufacturer's recommendations, but the thing basically is, if you do, if you do what they say for you to do, and do it when you're supposed to do it, you will be surprised how long things last. And all I know is that on my end, I want the balance sheet of your farm to be very strong on the machinery side in the farm shop. I don't want you to spend money on repairs, but don't think that's saying don't spend money on maintenance.
Right.
Like I had, I've worked with successful farming, and for a few years now, and been blessed to have stories in the magazine or little articles about maintenance tips. And one of the things that we covered a while back, and I believe we covered it on the TV show, on the machinery show last year, about air conditioner service.
It's coming up, yeah.
It's coming up.
Yep.
The thing basically is it's very simple to service. I mean, today air conditioning in a piece of farm equipment is an essential element. It's like an office building thing, because the windows don't open, so you have to have air conditioning. It wasn't like years ago we had an open platform tractor or the old open platform combines, right? So the thing basically is that if that air conditioner doesn't work, I mean, you're really not.
Can't use it.
You can't use it for all intents and purposes. But who services their air conditioner? I'm not talking about just changing the filter, or to say, the belt is tight. The refrigerant needs to be exchanged, like an oil change. What needs to happen on an air conditioner system is you need to evacuate it. That means remove all the refrigerant. It used to be R12, now they're mostly R134A, but so it's a refrigerant. And then a vacuum needs to be pulled on the system. And because what happens is that water will boil at 50 degrees Fahrenheit in a vacuum. So over time, the natural heating and cooling and thermal cycling underneath the hood will let some of the refrigerant out, and in turn bring some moisture in. When the moisture from the atmosphere mixes with the refrigerant, it creates an acid. The acid eats the compressor. It eats what they call a desiccant. A desiccant is a moisture. If you ever buy a piece of electronics, they have that little package that looks like salt in there. Right, that's a desiccant.
Do not eat.
Right, do not eat. My wife ate that once, actually. To tell you the truth. Believe it or not. You don't die from it, at least thank God she didn't. But anyway, what happens, so it eats that desiccant bag and puts those little salt-like crystals through the whole system, seizes the compressor, blocks most of them use an orifice tube today to monitor to control the refrigerant flow, and now you're looking at a $3,000 repair. Whereas if every 2 years even if you had to bring the equipment to the dealership to be serviced, and they pumped down the AC unit, they evacuated, they discharged it, they evacuated, that's pulling a vacuum and boiling off the moisture and filled it up with the proper amount of refrigerant and refrigerant oil. I mean, getting back to my little Escort, 500,000 miles, air conditioner, freeze you out, never put a nickel into it. So I don't want you to go into harvest and say, look at that, and you're going in with that combine and looking at that yield monitor. Man, this is great. Everything I learned, I got X amount of bushels per acre. This is great, wonderful, and then all of a sudden the AC pukes and you find out it's a $5,000 repair. Well, you just gave your yield bump away.
Yep.
And what I like to tell the farmers that I have the opportunity to talk to is that look at everything in the shop as bushels per acre.
Right.
So in essence, if you have an unnecessary $5,000 repair on your air conditioner in your combine, we're using that, pick on that as an example, right? At 350 corn, how many bushels do you have to pay for that? And if it costs you a couple of $100 to pull the system down and service it, and that could give you, I'm not going to say it's never going to break.
Right.
But you're not going to grenade the whole thing.
It's going to give you more time
right.
between.
And if you could go 5, 10, I mean, my little Escort's in 1998. I never did anything to repairs for the acres because I serviced it. So the thing basically is that if you look at that and say, again, take the long view and look at that and say, hey, yeah, it's going to cost me a couple $100. But a lot of things, even you could buy an AC charging station. They're probably, because you need to buy a recovery unit with it today, you could probably buy one for around $2,000. So you may say, oh, God, I don't want to spend that. I don't want you to spend that. But let's think out of the box as farmers. Why don't you co-op that with a couple of friends of yours? You don't need it all the time.
Right.
So you got a couple of buddies. You got a couple of buddies from church. You got a couple of buddies from town. You say, hey, let's invest $500 a piece, 400, 10 guys.
Yep.
$200 a piece, and bring the piece of equipment around, because you're only going to use that equipment. You don't need to invest in it to singularly. But I think we need to think out of the box. I think as farmers, we need to look at other industries and say, what do they do in other industries? They co-op stuff. And if it's not something say, hey, I'm going to service all my air conditioners this year. Hey, do it in the pickup truck also, because if the pickup truck goes bad, it's a $2,000 that's still coming out of the bottom line regardless. So that's my take on it.
It's really interesting because I, like you said, we are going to have a segment on the TV show about that you did coming up in a show coming up here pretty soon. But we were at a shop in Missouri, Dave Mowitz and I and David Ekstrom, our other producer of the show, and the farmer down there had his own AC maintenance thing, and was saying how his neighbors come by and he he's charging them less than it would cost for them to go in, to take it to the dealership or take it to the wherever to do it. Yeah. But it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah, and the thing basically is, but we need to do it. We need to look at all this. Like I said, and it's so easy. It's so easy, especially if funds are tight, if money is tight, and look at it. But like I say, is that it's the long view versus the short view, and and sadly, if you don't take care of it, I mean, it's going to come back.
Right.
And it's going to come back to bite you, and it bites hard.
Yep. It's only gonna keep going for so long eventually.
Right. And it's the same thing with hydraulic fluids, it's the same thing with engine oils, it's the same thing with filtration. I mean, to tell you the truth, it's really not overly complicated. It's just a matter of doing it. And it's a matter of having the mindset, and I say it's more of a thought process.
Scheduling it and then sticking to the schedule.
Yeah. Can I just add one other thing?
Of course.
I don't want to go too long, the thing, and another thing which I believe I did I didn't think I did a segment on this on the TV show. I may have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but whenever you have an engine, I don't care what it is, whether it's in the farm equipment, whether it's in your truck, your wife's car, and the engine is running. Basically, what does every engine do? It converts chemical energy to mechanical energy and burns fuel. Whether it's diesel fuel, whether it's a gasoline, or whether it's a E85 ethanol, it's chemical to mechanical energy conversion. That process creates heat. Heat is registered. The metric to measure heat is BTU, British Thermal Units. When you shut any engine off and the hood is closed, when you shut any engine off, everything, contrary to what you may believe, is that all of the components become superheated. And in engineering, when we say superheated, means it goes to an extended heat level beyond its normal operating range. So what happened, and why does that happen? He said, that's crazy. I got the thing off. How can I be superheated, right? That's because the residual heat is in the engine block. It's in the cylinder head. It's in all the components underneath the hood. And in engineering, the area that we have to work in, we call it real estate. So if you look at under the hood of any piece of farm equipment, a car, a truck, what have you, even a lawnmower today, there's not a lot of real estate because there's so much stuff there. That acts as a sponge and holds heat. So what happens is that when the engine is shut off, you actually lose the cooling effect of the cooling system, so everything becomes elevated in temperature. By shutting off the engine, before you shut off, let it idle for 30 or 40 seconds. And the reason why you're doing that is you're allowing the cooling system to absorb more of that heat, and then getting out of the piece of equipment or the vehicle and opening the hood. We all know from basic physics that heat rises. So if you open the hood and let that heat out, you limit the extent of what we would call in engineering the thermal excursion, how hot those underhood components get. And it is so simple. I tell people, put a Post-it note on the dashboard, put a Post-it note on the cab of the tractor. You get done, hey, you're pulling a chisel plow, all right? I mean, you're pulling up, hey, somebody's plant this to pull them. You're using that 400 horsepower tractor to pull those, right? Or so the thing is that, and you're stopping and you're shutting the engine off and you're calling it a day or whatever, you're refueling, get out, pop that hood, because that heat dries out and affects everything underneath the hood. There's so much electronics today. The biggest killer of electronic components is heat. So you have the electronics, you have connections, you have wires, you have rubber hoses, you have gaskets in the engine, valve cover gaskets. There's no engine today you want to change a valve cover gasket on. All right, valve cover gaskets. You actually have the casting of the cylinder head. Not so much in farm equipment, but you'll see it in light-duty vehicles, pickup trucks, cars. A lot of engines today have aluminum cylinder heads. When you actually shut that engine off, that coolant actually boils in that cylinder head, and it's very common for an aluminum cylinder head like that to, over time, it's not going to happen the first time, don't be paranoid about this, but they use a steel insert for the exhaust valve seat and for the intake valve also, but they'll drop the seat, because the thermal cycling will have it loosen up. And when you drop a valve seat, you just destroy the motor when you go to start it. Cylinder heads cracking. All of this is from thermal cycling. So if you could get out there and remember to pop the hood. Now, I'm not saying if you go into town to get something, you jump out in the parking lot and pop the hood, even though I sometimes do that, I will admit to it, right? And
go to the grocery store.
Right, to go to the grocery store. I mean, you have to be within reason, but it gets back to a thought process of mindset that if this engine, be it farm tractor, be it car, be it pickup truck, be it sprayer, what have you, if we could limit the extent of the thermal excursion and how many thermal excursions, well, you just added life to it. And that's really, really important. I mean, if you don't, like our farm tractor, I get done doing something, I pop the hood. It's 14 years old, has no leaks. The hoses are beautiful. The belt is beautiful. Nothing is leaking. The electronics are all good. I could go take, there's nothing worse than going to take a connector off. Let's say you're doing something under the hood of a piece of farm equipment or a truck, and you need, okay, this is real simple. I got to change this sensor. I got to change this whatever, right. or I got to change the thermostat. And you go to touch the plastic connector and it breaks in your hand. That's from thermal cycling. That connector dried out from those heat exposures. And now what became a 5-minute repair is now a nightmare.
Right. That's a really great tip, because for one, it doesn't cost anything.
Costs nothing.
Yeah. And
it's good exercise.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, it's just a thought process, just a way to think. differently about how you.
And that's really that's really what it boils down to. I'm going to get back to my car days if I can for a second.
Sure.
And years ago we were young men, and we went out to Zanesville, Ohio. There used to be an NHRA drag race there. Used to call it the Spring Nationals, and they used to say, that's where I first heard the saying as a young boy that if you don't like the weather in Ohio, stick around 10 minutes, it'll change. But I think no matter where you live in farm country, you could use that saying. But what happened was that we went out to that race. We were young kids, and had a '68 Dodge Dart, and we drove out there and everything, and it was great. And but it was raining. So they had seminars going on, and there was a chassis company called Alston. I don't know if they're still in business. They made drag race chassis, and this was many, many years ago. There was no PowerPoint. There was a slide presentation. All right, they had a presentation on setting up the chassis. Now, we didn't have a drag car, but I like to learn. So we went to this seminar, and I remember the person running it. I was a young kid, maybe 18, 19 years old, and the person running it had slides and everything, and they had this beautiful picture of a drag slick wrinkling up. Because when the car leaves the line, they call it wrinkling the tire. And if you have the chassis set right, you really wrinkle the tire. All right. So basically, what in essence, and then he had the person giving the seminar had these slides, and what he spoke about, and I don't remember what the dynamics of chassis setting up, but what I did carry with me for the next 30 years was, he says, is that it all has to be in harmony. He says it needs to be in balance. And if we look at agriculture, if we look at all the advancements we've had today with pushing yields, if we look at things we're doing today for soil health, cover crops, all right, what are we talking about? We're talking about the plant, the soil, God's creation being in harmony, bringing back that harmony. Same thing as in the farm shop.
Right.
You need that piece of equipment to be in harmony. You need to listen to it. Just like in the crop, we'll do a tissue analysis, right? To say, hey, is the uptake of the plant is what's there? Well, we can't do a tissue analysis with machinery, but we could do oil analysis. We could do hydraulic fluid analysis. Right? We could listen. The machinery talks to you. It's, do you want to choose to hear it? Right. And I cannot stress enough how that mindset. Now, the sad part about it is, if you go out to the shop and something's broken today, this talk I did with you, or having that you listen to, is going to do nothing for you, because if it's broken, it's broken. If the crop is dead, the crop is dead. But it's that change of that mindset. And I believe that there's a three-legged stool here. There's the agronomic component of farming, there's the marketing component of farming, and there's the machinery component of farming. And if it's a three-legged stool, and if we take that three-legged stool and put the same attention to detail, and it may not be the same person.
Right.
Back east, we were mostly dairy farms. So we had somebody who took care of the cows, and somebody who did the field work, or did the field work and the machinery or what have you, and there was, and I'm sure it's like that every place else. But if you look at it, it's really not difficult, and I want everybody listening to this. I love success, and the name of the magazine is Successful Farming. I want you to be successful, and I just feel that I could help you be successful. And there's nothing to do with me. This is because I see so much of an unsuccessful mindset, not in the field, in the shop.
Right.
And under the hood. And nothing makes me happier than seeing you have a great harvest, great crop prices, and not spending money on unnecessary repairs.
Right. Very, very nice. Very helpful. Let's just pause for a second here and thank our sponsor. Today's program is brought to you by Acuron Herbicide from Syngenta. To learn more, visit acuron-herbicide.com. While you're there, hear firsthand accounts of how Acuron stopped tough, resistant weeds in their tracks and made sure they never came back in the Acuron Chronicles podcast series. So we touched on the TV show a little bit, and one of the reasons you're here in town, among other things, out here in Des Moines, out of from New Jersey is to shoot some segments for the next round of machinery shows. What are some of the topics that we're gonna hear from you about tomorrow?
Okay, I'm working off of memory. All right, I'm working off of memory, but Dave Mowitz has authorized them. One of the topics, I'll do my best to recite them to you, is HEI ignition diagnosis. Now, HEI. Look, I'm going to admit this to you because I think if we're all honest with ourselves, thank God we all have farms and a lot of room because we throw nothing away. All right? And that's from our conservative upbringing, our conservative mentality. It may not be good for the road, but it's good for the field. And it's eventually, we're the original recyclers. Mm-hmm. We the key buzzword saying everything is a repurpose. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Well, we farmers have been repurposing everything since their existence. So the thing is that there's a lot of trucks, equipment, old irrigation engines, or pump or auger that used a General Motors Chevrolet engine. And back in 1975, they came out with an ignition called HEI, high energy ignition. Okay. That's 41 years ago. People still don't know how to service it. So there's a lot of farm trucks that could be used. There's a lot of old motors that could be used. So one of the topics I'm going to discuss is how to properly diagnose and service an HEI distributor from an old General Motors engine that I'm sure is around someplace on your farm. Another topic I want to discuss for the show, or we're going to cover for the show, is we'll talk a little bit about fuel. 2 different segments on fuel. One is going to be grouped together, cetane and octane. Matter of fact, I did a short article on Successful Farming about that, and people don't understand. Hey, you pull up to the gas pump in town, right? It says regular plus super, or whatever you may call it, 87, 89, 92 octane. What is truly octane? So we're going to discuss that, and then the counterpart to that with diesel fuel, which usually is not labeled on the pump. Believe it or not, in New Jersey it is. It's probably one of the few states that label cetane. So we're going to talk about what cetane is and what octane is. I want you to be an educated consumer. So when you buy fuel, I guess, and depending upon the price of oil, crude oil, and depending upon the price of everything else, is that probably fuel is probably the 3rd or 4th largest input into your farm. And if oil goes up to $150 a barrel, maybe 2 or 3, but it's definitely a large input into the farm, into that balance sheet again, right? And sadly, the majority of people spend all this money on something. Your fuel is really unique because you spend a lot of money on it. You benefit from it, but you never see it.
Right.
You don't get a gallon of diesel fuel in your hand. Right. You pump it into the tractor. The truck comes to the farm and puts it in a tank. You don't see it, right? Mm-hmm. You know it's there. So the thing basically is that I would, if I had to call it, say the farmer's guide to understanding fuel. Okay. It's not going to be a thesis, but to understand fuel. So that's another segment I plan to do. Another one I'm gonna talk about is. Oh, geez, I forgot.
That's all right.
Yeah, I forgot. I have, I'm going to talk about the HEI. I'm going to talk about the fuel. I'm going to do something on gasoline, on specific gravity weight of gasoline. Okay. I'm going to talk about, how to properly diagnose a no-start problem on a gas engine. Okay. So that's another thing. That's another thing I'm going to discuss. The other thing the other topic I want to cover is diagnosing whitish blue smoke on engine startup. Talk about valve stem seals and valve guides, and what's happening there, what you need to look for, on it. And there was 8 of them, but I'm sorry, I got brain fade.
That's all right. I kind of put you on the spot.
No, I should know it because I'm going to be doing them tomorrow. But it's like hey, I'm a typical farmer, right? We'll cross that bridge when we get there. Yeah. We got to worry about. We're going. My wife would say, "Well, how are you going to handle that when you turn around?" And I'm not there yet. I'm at the other end of the field. I'll figure out how to turn around when I get there.
All right. Well, we're getting close on time. I mean, we could probably talk a lot longer, but one thing I wanted to bring up and ask you about is how responsive you are to questions from the audience. You're really and it's you that if somebody asks a question, you're the one that's answering it when we send you somebody's question.
Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, in the magazine, in Successful Farming magazine, in my page there, at the end I have a website, email address, sfenginemanandagriculture.com, and then at the end of each TV segment I close, and up on the screen, Jason, you put up on the screen the same email address. And I want to say to you that I really am, I'm sincere. I want to communicate with you, and if someone contacts me, I will definitely get back to them. I'm not going to say I have all the answers, but I will hopefully steer you in the proper direction, and I will not abandon you. If I don't have the answer, or if I don't know something, say try something, get back to me. And lots of times, if you do email me with a question, if it's something a little bit more detailed, include your phone number. I like to talk to even if it's a simple question, then I could email you back or what have you. But oftentimes I like to open up a dialogue instead of a monologue. And so I like to talk to you, because I can say, well, geez, did you check this? What about this? What about that? And then we could go back and forth. Right. And I look forward to it. And we've had We've had a lot of people contact me, and I am grateful, and hopefully I was able to help them and steer them. But here at Successful Farming, like I said, think of the name and the magazine. We want you to be successful, and if anything that I could do to help you, oftentimes, I'm phone fixing something. I can't get there and work on it with you, but I could steer you in the right direction, or help you out, or what have you. And also, to tell you the truth, that's how I learn. And then I take that experience, and then I could give that to someone else. So please feel free to use that. That's something here at Successful Farming that we want to be able to offer to either the viewers or the listeners of this podcast, or read the magazine. That you need to ask somebody something sometimes,
right? And
but the only thing that I can say to you, though, is that I will hold your feet to the fire. So if I say to you, well, what's the fuel pressure? You tell me it's good. I know if you check something, it's like, so what's your soil? Oh, it's this, it's sandy. Okay, give me a CEC. Don't tell me, oh, it's sandy, or it's this, or it's that, or, well, if I say, what's your fuel pressure? What's your this? If you don't have that, I'm going to send you back. I'm going to say, all right, when you get that information, contact me again, because you cannot diagnose anything. Think of it, practical. Going to a doctor. I don't feel good. What's your symptom? I don't know. I don't feel good. The thing basically is we have to have, and from my years of being in diagnostics with engines and working with oscilloscope companies, when you check something, I don't care what it is, you got a number.
Yeah.
If you tell me it's good,
that's
not a number. It means that you think it's good. And oftentimes, and you have to remember, diagnostics is not so much finding out what's wrong, it's finding out what's not wrong.
Ruling things out.
You go to a doctor, say, I don't feel good. So, okay, let's start with a blood test, chest X-ray, and whatever. And you come back and say, okay, that's all good. Well, thank God that's all good, but that doesn't mean you're well.
Yeah.
We have to look further. So if we can't conclusively rule things out, and so many times guys just want to say, oh, it's good, or it's that, or I know it's not that. And that's really, what the segment is about, the gas engines, because we're going to talk about how to properly check for spark. And that doesn't mean pull the wire off and have somebody crank it, or pull the rope on the small motor and get a shock. Or ground the spark plug to the engine block and say, oh, we got spark. That don't cut it, because that doesn't mean it's going to be spark in the cylinder. So basically, that's the only thing I ask is have numbers.
Okay. All right. Well, Ray, thanks a lot for coming in. It's always nice to have you in town for a visit, and thanks for your time.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate being able to connect with the audience. And hey, remember, when you get done, if you listen to this in a tractor or a combine, pop that hood when you get done.
Perfect. Thank you.